positive heads out there. Brandon Beecham and Dalian here. As always, thanks for tuning into the Positive Head podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Sue Krebs. Sue is an Akashic Records consultant and the creator of the soulspeaking.net website, as well as the Soul Speaking Facebook page that offers a steady stream of wisdom to millions of her followers. She describes herself as someone who is celebrating the connection to her authentic self, which is certainly a concept that is close to my own heart. So I'm very excited to have her on the show today. Hello, Sue. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So, to get things started, I guess we should start with what it is that you do. I find very, very fascinating reading the Akashic Records. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I suppose a place to start would be, what are the records?
That is definitely a good place to start.
A lot of people haven't heard of them. I didn't hear about them until a few years ago, so I get that. What the records are is a vibrational record of every soul's journey. And so it's your story, it's your history, it's the eternal part of you.
Right.
And so it's something that we can tap into to help us in our life now, because certainly our soul is definitely part of what we're doing, whether we really acknowledge and recognize that or not. And so by accessing the records, you're tapping into that wisdom, into that knowledge that you've gained through lifetime after lifetime. And
right.
How can I apply that now and make life easier, make life better, make life more fulfilling and satisfying right now?
Right. Yeah, I know when I was first exposed to the idea of the Akashic Records, I found it just absolutely fascinating to just conceptually to go to. I know I read stories of people, in the dream state or meditative state where they go into like a hall that's like a giant library. It's like right. Google for the universe, or
exactly. Yeah, I often refer to it as an internet or
right.
as something like that. That there's that much information. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's mind blowing to think, all beings on all dimensions of reality, and a file for each of those, right. Everything that has happened or would happen or could happen. So I've always been super fascinated by the concept. So when I met you and, found out that's what you did, of course, I was very intrigued to learn more, which is, of course, what this is all about here today.
Right. It is an interesting thing. And when I first was introduced to it, it kept coming up and across my radar in
right.
various ways. And maybe it's not the typical response, but when I found out what it was, I wanted to know how to do that. It was something I want to be able to do that. Certainly other people, it's not that big of a deal. It's like, oh, that's nice. But it really spoke to me. And as I've worked in the records now more and more, I have come to understand that this is something I've done many, many lifetimes. That
right.
This energy is very familiar to me. And so I do enjoy it greatly.
Now, when you're accessing the records, how are you discerning the information that you're getting? Are you visually, are you seeing something visually? Are you getting feelings, or is information's coming in blocks?
It comes intuitively. Mm-hmm. So for me, what I've learned that my primary mode of receiving information is through the thoughts, through just that knowing, mm-hmm. their sentience. And it's suddenly just there, mm-hmm. kind of thing. It's funny because it isn't even like that it comes in as words sometimes. It's just stuff starts coming out of my mouth. And
right.
every once in a while I'll catch myself and go, well, that's really interesting. Where'd that come from? So it's like, I know it's not me per se, but that's how the information comes. It just shows up. Or it's also in a feeling sense, which is kind of hard to describe, that we put words to feelings to try, and not just feeling words, but we use the expression, this feels like, mm-hmm. and then you can describe all kinds of things or whatever. It's sort of like that. So I'll get it as a thought or as a feeling, but then there's also times when it comes as pictures. I'll get images, and that's kind of a funny story, because when I started all this and learned my intuitive process, I, for whatever reason, thought seeing was the way to go. That's I want to see. I want to be able to see. And
We're so attracted to that visual, stimuli.
I am a visual learner,
Sure.
so maybe that's the appeal. But it just seemed like that seeing was the best way. And I have a friend who I would work with various things, and he very much sees things. But when we would compare notes, what I described from my knowing and my feeling was exactly what he was seeing. So we were getting the same information, just in a different format. And he said, actually, the seeing is almost harder because there's more interpretation. What does the tree mean? What does the bird mean? There's meaning associations with the images that show versus sometimes the info is just there. So it was a process to let go of one method is better than another. And I think it's part of trusting. We had a conversation earlier about trusting ourselves, and that's part of that process. How does it come for you, and knowing that that's accurate and valid as well.
That's interesting because it sounds like the principles or the process is kind of similar to how a psychic would do it, except that, of course, I'm not going to assume that you consider yourself a psychic.
Well, it is psychic discernment, though, to some degree, right?
And I use the term intuitive,
right.
But we're dealing with energy interpretation. And what I've come to understand the difference between like what I do, what I'm accessing, and what a psychic might access, would be the energy that you're accessing. So when a psychic tunes into somebody, they're tuned in at a more personal level. So it's sort of like that energy field, your auric field, if you will, that's close in. And that contains all kinds of information that, your hopes and your dreams and what you're attracting and who's coming into your life and all that kind of stuff. Whereas the Akashic Records, it's an energy field, but it's much farther removed.
That makes sense.
It's a bigger, broader thing that encompasses that auric field as well, but it's more timeless, maybe?
It's almost like getting the same information from two different places, whereas a psychic might pick it up from that person. It's almost like you go straight to the source, where all the facts reside.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I mean, and by that, I don't want to say that it's more accurate or anything like that, because psychics certainly tune into that. But when we think of psychics, I think more as a predictive. We want to know what's coming. Tell me what's coming. We all like to know.
Yeah.
And with the Akashic Records, certainly that can be in there, but it's not used so much as a form of divination that way, so much as like what I access is the essence of who you are. So it's like when you know somebody and you feel really understood and it's like, oh my God, they get me. That's the part of you that I tap into. And so that's the part of the records that I access.
Very cool. So tell us, how did you get started originally doing Akashic Records?
It evolved out of my own personal process, my own journey, my spiritual path, my spiritual understanding, the whole thing. It's, where do you start? But long story short, it became part of my process I was raised Catholic. Parts of that worked, parts of that didn't work.
Let me guess, you did not learn about this in Sunday Mass.
Right.
No, we didn't talk about it. Although the Akashic Records are called and referred to as the Book of Life. So they are referenced in the Bible. And as they are in most other great traditions, I can't tell you all the other words that are used for it, but everything refers to this somehow. And so anyway, through my process of moving away from Catholicism and trying to understand, getting that there's something bigger that connects all of us. What is that something? How do I understand that something? My process then brought me to a point. I went to a weekend training, and it was really interesting because it brought together the whole concept of spirituality, which was sort of for a long time synonymous with religion, but then that separated. But there was still this spirituality piece. And then I'd always been fascinated by things psychic and paranormal and whatever other term, metaphysical, all those fun words. And this weekend training that I did basically melded those things. And I realized it's all the same thing, psychic and spiritual and all that. You're accessing this other that we can't see, touch, taste, or feel, but is very much there and very real. And that was all actually the same stuff. So it was this really cool thing. And I left that wanting to do readings. I didn't know what I was reading.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was going to read, but it was like sounded really cool. That's what I wanted to do. And, and it's so fun because, when you open up to things appear. When the student's ready, the teacher appears.
Right. You set that intention, and you're meeting the universe halfway with your just willingness to go down that road with an open mind and open heart, right?
And so things started showing up. I the big piece that came together for me then was the idea that everything is energy. And that took all the judgment away. That took the whole, negativity about God being vengeful and the wrath of God, all that kind of stuff. Well, if it's energy, it's more like physics. It's more, it's non-judgmental. You do this, that happens, that kind of stuff. And so that made a lot of sense. I have a background in engineering. I get the whole physics kind of thing. And from there, then I was introduced to all different kinds of energy healings and all the modalities that are available and stuff. So it was around that time that the Akashic Records started showing up. And so one thing led to another. At that time, there was only one book on the market that I could find that had really information about how to do anything with the records, because it was one of those sacred things. It was one of those topics that nobody would talk about. It was kept quiet. You only learned about it if you studied with this guru that could pass that information to you, that kind of thing. And so I read the book and started practicing it. And the woman actually has gone on. She's created an institute in Chicago where she teaches this. Her name's Linda Howe. And so I read the book, did the audio training with it. And then later that year, I actually had a chance to train live with her at a weekend event. And it really then becomes about allowing yourself to open to this aspect of who you are, and that we've pretty much all said, well, I can't do that unless you're brought up in a psychic family or, with that kind of phenomena as everyday normality. We tend to go, well, I can't do that.
One of my favorite quotes, Henry Ford, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right.
You're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's it exactly.
In this particular instance, I'm happy with my gifts and my abilities, and I leave to people like you, Sue, the expertise of reading the records. I might be able to do it, but I think you already do a great job.
Yeah,
So.
another good one that was recently told to me by someone. I can do anything, I just can't do everything. So
and that's
choose
it.
what it is.
We can, exactly. But, on a couple of notes, things are popping in. We're drawn to those things that we're meant to find. And, like I said, when I first saw the records or that stuff started coming up, people like emails, we talked about, you get on these newsletter lists and things, and the records kept coming up, and I had no idea what they were. And I'm sure it's not the normal, quote unquote, normal response to go, well, I want to know how to do that. most people aren't going to care. They're whatever. But for whatever reason, it really spoke to me. It really drew me in. And so when we follow that, I'm very grateful that I did pursue it, because it brings me so much joy to share that with people, to experience that with people.
Yeah, it's pretty unique and wonderful, gift that you've got and what you're sharing with people. And I think the success that you've garnered in really a short period of time speaks volumes, to that.
It's a crazy unfolding, no doubt.
So as far as so you started down the path with learning how to tap into and read the Akashic Records, and that then moved into soul speaking. Is that correct? Soulspeaking.net is like your blog site and your home base, and then of course your Facebook page. What inspired you to kind of take that next step to try and reach, because it's one thing to read for someone one-on-one, which we actually did a little bit ago, which was really, really great, by the way. And that's one thing. And then it's another thing to say, okay, I'm going to put myself out there and in some way, maybe not do a direct reading for, millions of people, but in your case, you've got a couple million, over 2 million people that are, following your page on Facebook. That's a lot of people that you're touching. What inspired you to kind of take that next big leap, and did you know that it would go to the level that it has? I mean, what?
No, I am pretty much as humbled and awed, I think, as anybody else. I had no idea. And it's funny because all of that stuff sort of evolved at the same time. Before I even did the training that led to wanting to do all this stuff, I had done an online class about energy and just sort of being introduced to that as the idea that that's really what makes life happen and how we create and all that kind of thing. And in that class, it was about creating a business. The woman that was leading it is very much geared towards helping entrepreneurs create their businesses on this heart-centered basis. And that's where Soul Speaking came from, because that was one of our assignments, was to come up with a business name and a tagline. And what is it you wanted to do, and what did you want to connect with? And that's been from the get-go is, the tagline that I was using initially was giving voice to the spirit within. Because we all have it, but we squelch it in various ways. And so helping people to hear that voice, their voice, not my voice, your voice.
Empowering others, yeah.
Exactly. And so that's where Soul Speaking, the name, came from. And then it just sat. And I think I got the website and it just sat. And then I also love to write. So at some point somebody's like, well, you got to start a blog. And so what do you write about? You write about what you're doing. I mean, I've always journaled. It's always been a process to help me figure things out. And so that was just the natural extension to create the blog and start putting them out there. And then the Facebook page, Soul Speaking, evolved because at the same time, okay, so I want to create this business. I want to do readings. Well, where am I going to find anybody who wants a reading and who wants to hear this? I mean, I'm from Minnesota. It's a fairly conservative area. It's not you walk down the street and there's,
people begging for Akashic Records readings on every corner.
There's not a high demand in my neighborhood for that, right? So it was kind of like, well, how do you find who wants this?
Yeah.
And yet having that just the deep knowing that it's important to put it out there. And so that's sort of where the Facebook page, well, this makes sense. This is a social media. I knew nothing about it, let me say. And so it was a process of figuring it out. And I played on Facebook for a couple of months in groups, actually Abraham Hicks stuff, meeting people all over the world. And it's like, well, if this is bringing people together, that's pretty cool. That means there's people out there looking for this. And so some friends and I were doing some other things at the time, and we all started pages. And I mean, I can remember at the very beginning, thinking, we talked earlier, one of my favorite numbers is 127. When my page hit 127 people, I was ecstatic. Seriously, it's like, oh my God, kids, look, there's 127 people here. I know 127 people.
Right.
And then, then it just kind of evolved from there. And did I have any intention of ever getting this big? Absolutely not. No clue how that, I can't say no clue. I mean, it came because people are looking for this. And I use it as a format to introduce the idea of the readings, but primarily it's about feeling good. It's about empowering people to have a choice, to know that there's a choice, whether you go through life happy or you go through life miserable. It's a choice. And it's built on all these other choices every day, the little things that we do, the things that we decide. And that's what I try to put out through the page, is that discernment that we can choose to be happy, that we can, everything we do is impacting our life. So
I think it's really cool the way you put it also, Sue, because you were basically saying that, no, you didn't, of course, have the expectation, but I'm going to go ahead and use that word, because you didn't have the expectation that it would become so big, and yet you were, in a way, hoping that people were, and, of course, it seems to me like people are ready to hear this, but you sort of just put out to the universe the hope that the material would be received, that people would benefit from it. Right. And otherwise you really couldn't know how well it would be received. So you just sort of put out your intention with no expectation, and then look what you got back. So it sort of validates everything you're thinking. Yeah,
exactly. Because, when I started again, I mean, I cataloged every benchmark when it hit 1,000. When it hit 5,000, okay, if I can hit 5,000, maybe we can hit 10, and hit 10. Okay, well, 10 is possible, maybe 25,000 is possible, and each one of those milestones was huge. And one of the things that I do on Facebook now is I help other people who are starting pages and, support them in that process, because there's not really an instruction manual that comes with Facebook. And so there's always questions and there's, all these kinds of things. And so it's been really fun to help other people create that and celebrate with them when their page hits a milestone that, oh my gosh, I never thought I'd get to 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 or whatever they're hitting. It's huge. It's just huge.
And my speculation would be that's the energy that got you to where you're at. I'm such a firm believer in you get what you want for yourself by giving it away to someone else, essentially. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, and you said something that was really interesting. You said, look, whenever I started thinking about trying to grow it too much, it would actually stunt the growth.
Absolutely.
Instead of just doing what I wanted to do and doing it joyously.
Right.
It's like making music for the purpose of making music, not to become a rock star, right?
Right.
You do it because you love it, and then you're coming from such a genuine place. And in your case, I noticed with a lot of the posts, they're actually your own quotes, which I think is really cool. We'll get to in a moment. But so instead of focusing on, it's got to be 127 people or, 1.2 million, you're just doing what you're passionate about, and the rest takes care of itself. And then you have that open heart and mind, and to help others. It's just all those things coming together would be my guess. Not having lived it with you, that it's culmination of all those things.
I think you're right. I mean, it's hard. You can't just say it's this or it's that or it's one thing. And it's interesting because whenever I would try to figure out how to do this the right way, whatever that means, or to focus on how can I monetize this? So great, I hit 100,000. How can I then turn this into a business where I get supported myself somehow through this? Whenever I started going down that path, like you're saying, that's when things would just stop. I swear to God, it would be like somebody just slammed a door and it would halt. And I had a friend who would remind me, just let it go and go back to why you started this. Go back to having fun. Go back to what part makes your heart sing about this. And when I would do that, I would let go. And it's interesting because now even as I say that, it was all of the baggage I would bring about what it meant to make money. That's what would slam those doors, because that's where the resistance was. That's where the fears were. And that's what gets played out. And so my page is always, I've called it a barometer of my alignment. And those numbers really reflect whether I'm lined up with that joy like you were describing, or if I'm lined up with fear. And that's what, it's hard. It's so funny because it's like, okay, so helping people, how do you teach them to let go of their fear? And that's going to make this grow. Yeah. Because it's not counterproductive, but countercultural to what we're taught. Work hard. These are the steps. Well, you know what? We'll go back to your quote. If you think you're right, or if you think you can, you think you can't, you're right. That's how this whole thing works. If you're so bent on one thing, that's what you're going to get. And so it's just such a visual for everything. It's incredible.
It's been a huge life lesson for me is not trying to force something, learning how, doing something from a point of, coming from the joy of doing it, not needing an end result. And it seems like you've really tapped into that. And I think even, for our audience and listeners, that's a huge takeaway. Do what you're doing because you love to do it. If you're in a joyous state, that joyous state attracts other things energetically that bring you joy. And usually money brings people joy. So if, it will come. You don't have to worry about all those details as much, at all, really. You just need to focus on doing what you're doing and let it play itself out.
Very much so. And one other thought came in when you talked about, putting out there my message. And I often forget, and this may sound just plain stupid, I forget that there's potentially, because not everybody sees them, but potentially millions of people that can see this stuff. Yeah. I don't think about the millions of people. I mean, when I'm putting stuff out there, or if I'm writing something, I'm writing it for me because it helps me make sense of whatever I just went
Huge
through.
point.
And then somebody will make a comment and it's like, oh yeah.
This is
there's
affecting
people
other
that
people.
actually read that. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. But if I thought about it, I don't think I'd do it. If I was doing it for that purpose, I just do it. And then it comes back and it's always that sort of astonished, oh my gosh, people really do read this stuff. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I often say as well, because I'm so passionate about the subject matter, spiritual realms and how we can create abundance and, law of attraction and all these things. And I talk about them to anyone who will listen. And, I always try and reiterate to people, please don't take me wrong. I'm as much more of a student than I am a teacher, and oftentimes I love talking about the subject matter because I can instantly feel my own vibration rise. Right. And when my vibration is in a heightened state, like it is now having this conversation, I'm, attracting things that resonate with that vibration. So it's more of it truly is more of a conversation for myself than anyone else. So I can really relate to what you're saying, and I think that's a very key point, because I think that sometimes people can look at it and say, oh, you're preaching, or you're always and it's like,
yeah. And I don't need anybody to agree with me. I don't, I've come to a place where I understand that everybody's at their own point in their process and in their life. And, you can think I'm all full of hot air. That's fine. Because at some point I would have thought the same thing. But it's just where I am. And I'm one of those just people that feels the need to share what I've learned, take it or leave it. It's okay. But I'm going to just put it out there. And obviously a couple million people thought it sounded good at some point. They liked the page. Mm-hmm. And I still get messages, which I really, really appreciate, when somebody takes the time to just say, what you're doing really matters, or it touched me. I just got a message the other day that somebody wrote and said, you are amazing because you spend so much time giving all of this. I look at your page every day. When I'm having a hard time, Beautiful. It matters. It's just like, oh my gosh, wow.
You're touching someone's life in a way that, when you get that kind of feedback.
It was, she says, I wish I could give you a hug. And I wrote back to her, I said, you just did.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome, because that's, it really, I recognize that. And I think Brandon does as well, as a huge part of how to go about this the right way. Because you, of course, it's wonderful to get that validation from the people that you're reaching, that it is touching them. But like you said, you're doing it for yourself. I have my own reasons for sort of knowing or understanding why you just have to do it for yourself. I guess from like the artist point of view, of course, we mentioned that Brandon and I have produced music together. And when we do anything creative, we just have to be okay with it first and foremost. It is for us first and foremost. And so to me, that seems like the only way that something like this can ultimately work. And I think that's the way that you can sort of ensure that you're going to touch other people out there if you're sort of true to your own intention. Yeah. So you have to sort of like have it all together first, like within yourself, and then sort of like put it out to the world.
Yeah. And it's, Brandon mentioned earlier the idea that, always being a student, even though I've gotten to where I am, I'm not where I yet want to be. So it's the continual movement and growth. And I'm just sort of telling you, okay, this is what I figured out. This is what I figured out. This is what I figured out.
The more the more you realize you don't know.
Come back tomorrow and I'll have another, so it is about just your own process and your own journey. And I think when you come from a place of that kind of, selfish has such a bad rap, but
selfish.
How can you not be selfish? We can only come from self.
Right.
And so when you can own that and say, I'm on this journey and let me just tell you what I've picked up, that's when you resonate with so many others, because there's no need for you. I don't have an agenda. I don't need you to be this or do that.
Show up a particular way.
Exactly. you get to be you, but let me just share what I've done, what I've learned, what I've picked up. If something of that helps, awesome. Take it. Make your path a little bit easier. No need for you to reinvent the wheel or, figure out how to start fire all over again. Just turn the stove on and go. And so it is about just, I guess, ultimately that's where the connection then comes. People hear that. Hear it energetically, because you're not hearing it with your words, but you hear it energetically, and that's what then they can take and move forward from.
I think that's a really important point as well. When you reference the word selfish, all these feelings come up for people of guilt and whatnot. But really, for me, what I found and seems to be a universal truth, we're all here first and foremost to learn self-love. Because until you have that self-love, you're really not that much of a help for anyone else.
If you don't have it,
you can't give what you don't have.
Well, right, and you can't give what you don't have.
Right.
So they talk about filling your cup first. If you don't have it, at some point, the battery runs dry and it's dead. Yeah. So you've got to find a way to keep recharging it. Everybody talks about that self-care and nourishing and all that. And this is just that on a bigger scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was joking only a couple days ago that my New Year's resolution for this year was going to be to put myself first more. And I said it in kind of a facetious way, but for sure, I think that like my friends like Brandon who know me know that I do mean it that way, that I do mean to sort of be more selfish in all the right ways that are going to, benefit others, not just me.
Well, and that's an interesting thought, that society tends to make self-sacrifice noble. There's nothing noble about it, people. It's not conducive to much other than becoming a splat on the road at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now everybody will walk on you. That's fine. But you can't do much when you're flattened.
Right. Confusing self-sacrifice with martyrdom.
Yes.
Not quite the
exactly.
Makes me think of the gamer tag that I took many years ago, and now my son uses. It's smarter one. Martyr with an S in front of it.
There you go.
So now he's going to be probably harassed online when he's playing a video game. You think you're smarter than me? You will be the martyr. No,
he can take it.
Yeah,
he really is smarter than you, whoever you are.
Yeah, exactly. So, as I mentioned, one thing that I noticed and I found really intriguing, and that separated you from a lot of similar pages online and on Facebook in particular, was a lot of times it's your own quotes. And I'm very curious about that. As someone who's just a huge nerd when it comes to quotes and loving quotes and appreciating quotes, how do you get the inspiration for your quotes? Is it, and I'm sure there's not just one answer, but do you wake up in the middle of the night and it's there? Do you have an experience? I just got in a fight with my husband and I just came out with this one-liner that said it all to him, and now I want to share it with the world? Or is it just, is there any particular patterns that emerge in,
You're going to laugh. Okay. It's nothing as glamorous as all that. The way I got started doing my own quotes, when I started the page, as I said, I knew nothing about Facebook, and I knew nothing about creating these, what they called memes. That's the term now that, basically is a photo with a quote on it or some pithy saying or whatever. I had no idea how to create that or whatever. I'm an amateur photographer, so I have a infinite supply of photos to work with, not all of a quality that you're going to want to share, but a lot of them are. So I didn't know how to put all that stuff together. So instead of taking on the task of learning all that, I started just sharing. And there's like thousands of Facebook pages. So that was easy, right? Except it's not, because then I began to learn all the nuances of the energy of these sayings. There's a lot of positive sayings out there, but a lot of them have a little negative oomph right at the tail. And you go, okay, well, that's really good up to that point. And then, so there was all that process. And then I got involved with a project, and we were trying to promote a a page collectively that a bunch of people were contributing to. And so they said, okay, send us your quotes. Like, what quotes? I don't have quotes. So it was kind of, whoops. At that point, it was sort of like, okay, well, I say a lot of things, and I was coaching and doing readings at that time, and people would, message me back or email me afterwards and say, this thing you said was really, really pertinent, or it really struck me, or things like that. So sometimes that inspiration will come through the readings. And so then I can't even claim that. That's something that's just being spoken through me. But a lot of times now, to come up with those sayings, it's a time constraint. It's like, I need to come up with some new memes to share. All right, so I'll go find a photo, and it's like, what does that inspire? Just looking at the photo, what does this say to me? What is this, something from the photo will trigger something, usually that's pertinent to what's going on in my life. And that's where they come out. So
an interesting process.
Yeah, it's not, don't quote me. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily for anyone else, but it's just like, okay, so a lot of times it's 11 o'clock at night, and darn, I need 3 more of
these. Did you just say, don't quote me?
So it's probably not the most effective, but it works.
It is effective because it works, and your quotes are really great. So, whatever works.
Thank you.
You recently wrote a lot of times with your quotes, then you'll tie them to a blog piece, which is very interesting as well. That's something that I'm going to be doing, or am doing, on Positive Head. At the time of us recording this, it's just about to be launched. So finding these quotes that I geek out on, and I'll probably steal some of yours at some point.
Feel free.
Some Sue Krebs specials, and then give Brandon's breakdown of them, my interpretation of what they mean. That's so, instead of a traditional blog where it's, having, whatever latest advances in this, that, or the other that's spiritually related, it's going to be a quote and a breakdown, and a breakdown. And you're not too far removed with what you're doing. So I was reading one of your blogs the other day, Dancing with the Void, I think it was called, or Dancing in the Void. Yep. And I found that one really interesting. So what can you tell me a little bit about the Void and what that blog was about?
That, again, as I said, the blog really became my online journal. And so it's processing through what I'm going through. And what I have noticed in my spiritual growth, my understanding, is that it's very cyclical. And I will get concepts. I talk about this, when I'm coaching and during readings, the idea something comes in as an intellectual idea. It's a concept. It's in my head. And then you go through life, you kind of practice it, you think about it, stuff happens, and then somehow, some point in time, it'll drops down into my heart. And those are like those ahas or those epiphany moments, that kind of thing. And the Dancing in the Void was one of those processes where I used to call it limbo. And that just had a negative feel to it. It's that in between. It's that point where you're no longer that, but you're not quite yet what's coming. It's this transitionary phase that is so very uncomfortable to me because I like to know. And this is
just so many,
Oh my gosh. It's the epitome of not knowing. And we feel stuck there. So that blog was really about my process of trying to understand that this space is not a bad thing, which is what I wanted to call it, because I would call it a funk. I'd get into this space where you're just sort of, things are integrating and you don't quite get it yet, but you're not that old stuff anymore, but you don't know how to be the new stuff, and you can tell something's going on inside you, but it just feels
like
uncomfortable.
Being 14.
yeah, kind of like that. And
all over again. And again, and again.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that process, and we talked earlier about, if you want to call it wordsmithing, or how we're creating with our words. And I
Spelling.
knew,
You're casting a spell with your words.
Right. And I knew that calling it a funk wasn't a good thing. I mean, it's putting it all into a negative light. This is a bad place. This is a place to avoid. And so in working with my mentors and things, come to understand that void, that emptiness is not really empty. In fact, it's the opposite of empty, in that it's everything.
Pregnant with possibility.
Pregnant with possibilities, with every possibility. And the only reason it's uncomfortable, and the only reason that you feel stuck there, is simply because you haven't chosen which of those possibilities, and I'll dare say it, I'll throw it out there, which of those parallel realities you want to step into.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
Because they all exist. And you're only in this indecisive place because you haven't chosen. And so that's what that article was really about for me, was trying to get to a space where this is an okay place to be, and that it's leading to something more, something that I will decide that I want, and I can move in that direction. And until I decide it's okay to be in this space where I just let everything exist with me. So
yeah, I think that touches on something that a lot of people find discomfort in not knowing. I think of the person, the young person going to college. I don't know what I'm going to be yet. What's my major? Or I'm out of college and I still don't know. And it's like, you don't have to know. A lot of times things come. I started a business 5 years ago that, I never would have guessed I'd be involved with. At that point in my life, I was 35 years old, and by some people's standards, you lost, you missed out, you're a loser, and it's just, its season hadn't come. Now it's a, successful venture. And, so a lot of times people feel like they have to always have that thing that's, their next move in front of them. And that's just not really how life works. And to even take your thought a step further, one of my favorite teachers, Osho, and to kind of paraphrase something that I read years ago from him, he says, certainty is death. Uncertainty is where life can happen. That's when all possibilities, when you've chosen, now you've kind of locked into something.
Right.
And I think that's why a lot of times actually find discomfort in that end of things. So, the real art of living is walking that fine line and finding the balance, finding the beauty in both not knowing exactly what's next and also in embracing the choices that you have made.
Yeah.
And what's led you to where you are.
It's interesting you put it like that, Brandon, because I absolutely relate to it being uncomfortable. I am also someone who needs to know, but I think that it's just, because of the way that we're raised so many times where, like you were saying, Sue, you had to sort of remind yourself, or a part of you knew that it was okay to be in this space. And so you sort of had to remind yourself that, to remember that it was okay to be sort of like in the in-between phase. It is uncomfortable, but you resisted the sort of the impulse to just go ahead and make a choice, kind of like what you were saying. In order for me to get out of this uncomfortable place, let me just go ahead and just like blindly choose anything. That anything's better than to just sort of be in the in-between phase. And I think that we all really see the benefit of being okay with being there now, as opposed to, feeling like you need to rush headlong into something just so you can get out of that phase. Right.
It's an interesting thing that I think when we feel that need to know, and I can speak to that, I want to say something about that in a minute, but we often think that, like you're saying, that any decision is better than this no decision thing, and it isn't even a no decision. Sometimes we just don't have enough information yet, or
absolutely.
It's not a bad thing to just sit and let it be revealed what's the next best step, instead of, like you're saying, grabbing the first thing that comes just because I don't like where I'm sitting, and so this will get me out of there. And then we think, okay, well, now I'm locked into this and I've got to follow it all the way through. No, guess what? We can choose again and again. And if we decide that, that venture, that decision didn't work, we have the right, contrary to what a lot of us are taught, that you can change your mind, that you can remake a decision. It's funny, you use the analogy of kids trying to decide a college career. I mean, think about it. Who at 18 knows what they want to do beyond Saturday?
I didn't know how to tie my shoes quite yet.
Totally.
Thank God for Velcro.
And even at 20 or something, get a degree, but that opens one door, your first job. And that's about it. It's not the rest of your life. And if you stop learning then, you're locked into that certainty, and that is death.
Yeah. And to even quote Osho again, one of the things that I've heard him talk about that I really appreciate and can relate to, he said, let me think exactly how I put it. Oh, he said, don't just do something, sit there. And what he means by that, of course, is don't try and just fill the void with crap. Go within. Of course, a big thing is meditation. He's talking about meditation. I think go within. Don't just do something, sit there. And I think I
like that a lot because, again, we were talking earlier how martyrdom and self-sacrifice is held up as a noble thing. So is being so busy that you can't think, that you don't choose, and it's not so much that you can't think. I think it's you can't hear. You're so busy you can't hear, you can't listen, and there's not a lot of virtue in that. When you go in, you silent the mind. Instead of always transmitting, you can become a receiver, which is a big part of what meditation is about. Exactly. And then you can really open yourself to that guidance. And that's a great way to put it, because being that transmitter, I mean, often we go through life just with it being a one-way signal.
Yep.
And it is an interactive. It is a transmission and a reception, but you got to do them both.
That's really what you're doing with the Akashic Records readings, right?
Exactly.
You just moved into that state that so few do, and that's into a receptive state instead of a let me tell you something state, Yeah.
And in my opinion, it's always most difficult to make a choice when you don't really know who you are, which again isn't necessarily a bad place to be, but I've found that, my decision-making process is incredibly easy when I'm very clear about who I am, because my decisions just sort of very naturally flow from that. And at times when I didn't really have that clarity, that's when you sort of just become paralyzed or overwhelmed by so many possible choices that you can choose from.
Well, and if you think about it, you're listening to 6 zillion voices in your head saying you should do this and you should do this and you should do this and you should do this, and they're all different because they're not you.
Right.
It's grandma, it's mom, it's your teacher, it's your culture, it's your this, it's your that, but they're not you. And so you're trying to make all of them happy, and you're paralyzed because there's no way you can. So yeah, when you know who you are, that stuff does just flow. I was going to say one other comment. I think a lot of people will relate to this. The idea of the need to know. Those of us who are very much in our heads and have a very active life there. I think from my own personal experience, this was one of my epiphanies that I had. It stemmed from my childhood. Basically, it was a form of survival, emotionally surviving, where I needed to know where everybody else in my family was emotionally and physically to feel safe. So I became hypervigilant. I needed to know where you were and you were and you were so that I could be okay. Or if I knew I needed to get out of Dodge or, whatever it might be. And I'm not talking, it wasn't like a violently abusive thing, but it was an emotionally turmoil and, tumultuous setting and ripe for a lot of things that ended up not feeling good. So that was my coping mechanism, was my need to know. And that is something that has been revealed to me as I work through my own stuff, that when I trust that I now have tools to deal with situations that I didn't when I was a kid, I don't need to know so much. I don't need to be so hypervigilant. We had the conversation earlier about trust. Boy, that's a big one. I can trust that I know how to deal with things, or that I will be able to deal with things in that moment when they happen. And I don't need to sort of be prepared by knowing what's coming.
Right. Because you can never be prepared for absolutely anything that could come up.
Truly.
That's one that I can relate to a lot, is learning to let go of any sort of fears. And it's something that I think was really instilled by my mother, who is such a mother hen, like so much fear about, the protection of her, kids and grandkids. And so I think some of that rubbed off on me to a degree. And that's something that even very recently I've really become conscious of and working through, is releasing that fear of needing to control, those that I care about, or monitor their well-being, and trusting that, the universe will provide, and that they'll get exactly what they need for themselves, and
exactly that they're capable of dealing with themselves, especially when it comes to your children. You quote unquote worry. Well, we're supposed to worry. You know what? I don't care what the topic. Worry is counterproductive.
Yeah.
And when you're putting that out there, that's not really what you're wanting to be putting out there, whether it's your kids or anybody else.
You're actually helping to co-create a problem.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's not really what you're trying to do. And so it's that stepping back and saying, you know what, they will be okay. They are capable of dealing with whatever life hands them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I noticed, in addition to the Akashic Records consultations, you also offer cultivating joy sessions, and I think you called it cathartic energy clearings. What can you tell us about those things?
Oh, let's see. Okay, so the joy coaching is what I've come up with. Basically, that's sort of the term I use for life coaching. Mm-hmm. Life coaching has become sort of a common word. Everybody throws it around now. And it differs for me from, I was trying to differentiate from therapy, which I have a background in that as well. But therapy tends to be more past focused. Where did you come from? How did you get here? What led to this? And that certainly has its place. It does.
Right.
But when you only do that, then you get stuck recreating more of that, because that's all you're focused on. And they wonder, why do I keep having the same kinds of guys show up in my life? I have the same kind. Well, because you keep
where attention goes, energy flows.
Right. So I didn't want to do therapy with people. I wanted to do a certain kind of life coaching, and the life coaching I want to do is to celebrate life, to focus on what feels good. And like we talked earlier, when you're in that heightened, joyous state, life flows with grace and with ease, and things come, and the most amazing things happen, and
where the magic can come in.
The magic is there, exactly. So that's where that came from. Is so the coaching is the way I guess I describe it. The readings that I do are almost like a snapshot of where you are right here, right now. What's going on, what you're dealing with, what you might be facing, decisions, that kind of stuff. Well, depending on where somebody is in their own personal process, they may not have support to help them integrate what might come through in a reading. And so that's where the coaching comes in. It's really kind of more of an ongoing supportive kind of relationship. And the cathartic clearing that is in there was one of those things that it came to me, and I always wondered, how do people get modalities? How do you know, so and so developed this? Well, where did that come from? Well, it's funny, what you ask for, you get, right? So it wasn't long after I started wondering how people got that I was given a clearing technique. And it's not particularly, earth-shatteringly different than probably a lot of other clearing techniques that are out there, but it works for me. And when I use it with clients, which often happens in a reading, it is an energetic clearing. It's a cleansing, and it has significant impact with people afterwards. So it ends up a lot of times being incorporated. I've never had somebody just, contact me and say, I want to do an energetic clearing. But it gets incorporated when I'm inspired in the readings to do that. I'll put that in.
You feel called to do it, or
it's kind of like it's a guided meditation is what it is. I'll walk somebody through, and the things that happen are just astounding. So I know it works.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting, area to pursue. My girlfriend Anna is actually doing that.
Cool.
Really going down that path of realizing that energy work and healing, or really you're creating a space, I think, more than anything, for people to heal themselves.
Truly,
right? It's like
truly, healing is
you're leading them and holding space for them.
Holding space and the intention of knowing they're already whole. And you can do that to the extent that they then begin to believe it themselves and can step into it. So yeah, it's a facilitation. It's not, we don't interject and come in and fix something for someone else. I mean, if they're not, open to it, it's not going to work.
Absolutely. So with the joy sessions, then it's really, if I'm understanding, essentially life coaching, but trying to take where they're at and then guide them to, okay, you're at point A, you really want to be somewhere else, whatever with that. But let's look at all the reasons you have to be joyous about being at point A, and focusing. It's sort of getting the focus and attention on the glass is half full kind of thing. It's which drums up that joyous vibration.
It's not only, I don't know if you're saying it this way, but when what I just heard you describe almost makes it sound like I'm saying don't go to point B or wherever you decide. And that's not it. It's how can I get to where I want to go?
Or rather, like the entry point, the entry point to get to point B is by fully, accepting and loving and finding the beauty and gratitude for point
right.
A.
It's about, it's about shifting that perspective. Because a lot of times when we're at point A, and we talked about the void earlier. Okay, so you're going to go somewhere else. Maybe you haven't figured out where it is you want to go. Maybe you have. But instead of saying, I want to be done here at point A because it's wrong, bad, icky, whatever, I'm at point A because it's the perfect place for me to be. And shifting that around so that I can see what's right about where I am, even though I still want to be somewhere else. And so the coaching is about both that process, accepting where I am, and then figuring out what's the easiest way to get to point B or whatever, without banging my head. You talk about New Year's resolution, and the only one I made last year was to abstain from head banging activity. And I can't say that I succeeded fully, but I was much more aware of it. And so when things felt like I was just banging my head on something, it's
just
like
a few Metallica concerts, and that was got it.
Right. It's like, this is not what I want to be doing. I'm pushing against something, and I don't want to do that. It's about that acceptance of, because I am here, that makes it the right place to be.
Absolutely.
And then helping people move forward, and it's support, because I can't tell you how many times people come to me and say, I can't talk about this to anybody.
Yeah.
It gives them a place to be able to talk about it. It gives them somebody else who understands the language, so to speak. And, it's almost frightening how little support and encouragement there is for choosing to live life joyfully. How many times have you heard somebody say, well, you should be really mad at them? Aren't you going to get back at them? Don't you? Really? That's what we want to be encouraging people to be doing? I mean, but we do. Why aren't you pissed off? Why aren't you angry? Why aren't you this? And I choose not to be, because it ultimately slows me down. And that's not to say I've got this figured out. Please.
No, I'm with you.
I get that impression. I bang my head on all these things as well, but
a lot less often than you used to.
Exactly. Because I try to be conscious of it. So that's what the coaching is about.
Sounds very exciting. Let me ask you this. Have you noticed yourself, since you've been on this, quote unquote, spiritual path, have you noticed a shift in planetary consciousness? I think
yes.
I can guess what your answer is going to be, but wondering what you think about that, and
absolutely,
where you think it's going.
Absolutely, I think. Again, we're creating our own worlds, right? In my world, and on Facebook, apparently, there are a lot of people looking for the positive message. That's really what I attribute the growth of my page to, is people are looking to feel good. And whether they see it, read it, hear it, they feel it there, that it feels good, and that's what draws them in. So people are looking for this, whether they're aware of it or not. Culturally, I mean, globally, we're seeing the breakdown of traditions, institutions, systems that have worked for decades, eons, whatever it might be, that are no longer working. So, governments are failing and businesses are failing, and these different concepts that have been in place for so long.
So much transparency now is putting a lot of these guys out of
that's what
business.
that's what I feel is the energy has become, especially, I mean, the 2012 stuff. There was all that hype about 12 21 12 or whatever, and
2012, yeah.
And so because I used to think it was December 12th, but I think the date was actually the 21st.
Oh, December 21st, 2012. Yes, right.
So, but it was that
on the
whole
Mayan
thing,
calendar.
right? 12, 12, 12, or, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so after all of that, that wasn't like a magic flipping of a switch, but it's very indicative of the shift that had become more visible. How much hype was there about that? That, it was kind of like when we flipped over the millennium. Are all the computers going to die? Are we all,
Totally.
Because it's 2000 now, right? So it's kind of like that. It's become so globally aware. People they feel it. They don't necessarily get it. They may not understand it. They may not know it, but people are feeling it everywhere. There's more unrest in staying in situations and circumstances that are limiting, whether it's in marital relationships that, just aren't working, and we've put up with them for years and years. Now people are saying, you know what, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And they walk away, or whatever it is. It's just what we're not willing to put up with anymore. And that's sort of what I see with the energy. People want to feel good. There's this knowing that you can, that's possible, and not only possible, but natural. That's the way we're supposed to be living, is in this joyous state and in this loving state, not with all these restrictions and limitations and fears and
conditions,
angst and conditions and all of that stuff. That's not what it's about. And I see that. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations with people one-on-one where it's like, gosh, this just doesn't work anymore. It's like, yeah, no kidding. So yes, I very much see a shift. And another one too, just to comment, the whole idea I mentioned earlier, how the Akashic records and accessing them used to be something that was very limited. And I think it's because humanity is evolving so much that those of us who lifetime after lifetime have made it be this focus, if you will, to really push our own personal growth, that as a whole, humanity is so much closer. We hear if you're in this world at all, you hear the term, the veil is thinner than it's ever been. The veil between, the spirit and the physicality is thinner. Well, that's because the vibration is closer. And at those higher vibrations, this other stuff is just not sustainable. So the fact that I can access the records, I'm a housewife from Minnesota, okay?
Right.
I've not studied at an ashram in India or anything like that. The fact that I can get into that is testament to the fact that we can all do this. This is available.
Accessible to all.
Yes.
Yeah. Just a matter of taking those steps and believing and,
doing whatever it is, letting go of whatever it is that says you can't.
And there's you're right. There's such you can just feel it. It's palpable. The, amount of people, as I'll call it, coming online. I think about when I first started opening up to a lot of these concepts and understanding my origins, the ultimate nature of reality, as I call it. And, and I talk about this in my introductory initial podcast, I would talk about this. I was just geeking out on this, and I'd talk about it to anyone who would listen, and people would shake their head, and that's very interesting concepts. Okay, so you're God in the physical, huh? Okay. Either really interesting concepts, and they'd go back to believing whatever it is they believed, or, okay, this guy's batshit crazy. One of the two. Now, as of coincidentally, 2012 was really a big turning point where I went from, the late 90s up till then with never hardly bumping against anyone like you. Dan over here is one of the only people in my life who I talked about this stuff with and really was comprehending it on the same level and is interested. And I'm sitting here scratching my head. How is everyone not just geeking out on this like I am? And now all of a sudden, especially in the transformational festival scene that, these events that I go to multiple times a year, so many people now, it's so interesting for me to have conversations with someone like you where you're doing most of the talking about this stuff and are, teaching me things, because before that was all only coming through books or some person that was in some far off place that I wasn't really, accessing. So it's, I've definitely, 2012 was a big turning point for me when I started just meeting, people all over, and it just seems to be getting more and more prevalent.
Momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. So I find it very exciting, and I just wanted to hear kind of what your 2 cents was, and of course, you're feeling and seeing it too. So that's some confirmation. So getting to the big one that I ask everyone, any positive paranormal stories that either particularly any stories of synchronicity or, as I call it, real magic, that have helped to guide you where you are today? Doesn't necessarily have to be, but I guess overall, any story that you think would be worthy of sharing that would excite and inspire in me.
Yeah. The synchronicity thing, when we call it that, I don't even consider that paranormal anymore. That's totally normal. Synchronicities happen all the time.
And you're right. It's almost like that's like a less exciting magical encounter.
And it's not, because I still get thrilled about them.
Right.
It's amazing
but once it
to
happens,
watch them
I know what you mean.
happen.
Once it starts happening to you so much, now there's
you
so
just
much
expect
synchronicity
them.
in my life. I'm just kind of
Yeah.
like, I don't even. Whereas I used to would shout up from the rooftops to tell people about it. I was so excited. Now I'm like, another synchronicity.
Right.
And then of course you have some of those that are more pronounced and dramatic, I guess you would say. But
yeah, I'm trying to think. There's so many. Trying to think of what would be
the one, two.
Right. That's worthy of sharing, that people are going to go, oh, wow.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be something overly dramatic or, just maybe something that was like kind of uncanny that put you in this position.
Okay. Well, when you put it that way, that makes me think of a story I was talking to Danny about earlier that, before I made this transition. Well, okay, so that's starting to bring up a whole bunch of things. Once you open the door. Okay, let me back up a little bit. I had a scrapbooking business that I did for a few years before I really started focusing on my readings. And I became friends with a woman. I was doing some shows in Salt Lake City. And I guess that's a story in itself, in that I got to Salt Lake and rented a car because I flew and drove around like I knew where I was going. Never been to Salt Lake before. And it feels like home. It feels like somewhere that is so comfortable to me. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And there's a funny story. People will think I'm really bizarre, but if we really want to go out there.
It's too late for that, Sue.
Okay. So I can share this because it'll be confirmation then. So what I was told was that way back whenever, my spirit or soul was part of the group that created Salt Lake.
Oh, wow.
And so that's that sense of home that I have, that it's like this ownership of, I know this. And it's really an interesting feeling. I have a friend out there. When I show up at her house, I walk in and I'm like, honey, I'm home.
Yeah.
And we just
so
laugh. It's so funny. So that's an interesting thing there. Just there's those kinds of experiences that you can't explain. But in that whole thing, in making the transition from this scrapbooking business to wanting to do readings, but I don't know if you can, make a living or if you can actually get paid to do that, or, all that kind of stuff, right? I had a website that would sell my scrapbooking. I was making these little mini album kits. And so I had them online and that kind of thing. Well, it got quiet for a few months, but I was busy with other things, so I didn't really notice that there weren't orders coming in. And so then finally somebody emailed me one day or called or something and said, well, I'm going to this scrapbooking weekend and I'm wondering, when I'm going to get my order. I'm thinking, what order? I hadn't gotten any notification of anything. So now I start freaking out. What are you talking about? Because I did everything. So I prided myself on getting stuff done. When orders came in, they went out within a day or two or whatever. And, so here she's like, I ordered 6 weeks ago. I'm like, you what? So I start looking. Well, my website had been hacked.
Oh.
And I had somebody who was like running the website for me, basically, or maintaining it. But it was sort of self-running, so it didn't need like a lot of hands-on. So she didn't know. Well, she had missed an important, apparently, update that had this glitch in the software we were using that let these people sneak in the back door some way or another. And so they went in, and what they had done was, in the way it was set up, the shopping cart, you entered your email address for what PayPal account linked it to. So they made it be theirs. So when money came into the website, it went to them. And this was going on. Now granted, it wasn't a ton of money. The website wasn't doing a whole lot of business. It ended up being like $300 or something. But, here's all these people that ordered things and are wondering where this stuff is. And I'm clueless, where I didn't get any notifications or anything. So anyway, long story short, we start dealing with the whole website thing not working and trying to, okay, well, we can update this software, but it's going to be $150. Well, I'm on the fence going, I don't really want to keep doing this because I want to move into doing these readings. So I kind of hemmed and hawed, $150 doesn't sound like all that much money, but at that time it was. And so I waited and I'm kind of deciding, should I do this or not? Well, then find out that every time I went in to change my email address to mine and put in a new password to change everything, they had stuck some sort of tracking. Every time I changed the password, they got the new password and would go back in and change it right back to. I can't be on this thing 24/7 to make sure that it stays connected to me. So it was getting ridiculous. This is like, okay, seriously, I'm getting the sign. I get it. I'm getting it, right? And so we put it down. I closed the website so that now nobody can order, because I'm not going to take anybody else's money that's going to go somewhere else, right? Till I can get this all sorted out.
Absolutely.
So we sort of put this under construction thing going on. So now nobody can order anything. Well, then... Good thing I can't swear because there would be words here. They found a way to use the email address, and we're now shooting spam via my email all over God knows where, right? And so then I get noticed that, actually maybe I didn't even get noticed. The website got shut down. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Wow.
So it's like, okay, this is the big universal sign that I'm supposed to let this go, because guess what? The website's gone. Wow. They just deleted the whole thing.
Wow.
The hosting company didn't want to be responsible for all this spam that was going out via my account, what I didn't know how to do anything about.
Wow.
They just deleted my whole website. And it was like, all right, I guess I'm supposed to be done with the website and with the scrapbooking thing. And at that point, then that's when I really started to focus. And it's funny too, because, okay, so now the push is, how do I make money doing readings? And of course,
now you're kind of forced.
Now nothing happened.
Yeah.
Because that became the focus. So it was, that's where I ended up putting my focus then, was on my spiritual growth and my passion to share this with people, as opposed to the scrapbooking, which is all great. There's nothing wrong with it, but it got to a point where my heart wasn't in it.
You had done what you came to do with that. And that's a really interesting story, because it's really a great story of, the glass being half full. You taking something and making the glasses half full. Here's an apparently negative experience, a really bad, thing. But really, what were those people doing? They were playing a role in your life to nudge you pretty aggressively in a direction. It's like they almost made the decision for you.
Exactly.
And the sight was gone. And so it's such a great example. You could have stayed focused on, oh my gosh, I've been screwed over. This is awful. This is bad. Instead you were, you had the wherewithal and the vision to say, oh, okay, maybe something more is being told to me here. Maybe I'm being nudged in this direction. And you took that negative and spun it into a couple million followers on online and thriving business. So that's pretty inspiring story. What would you say as far as your future plans? I mean, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I would love to be reaching more people directly. I'm out here in California for a week, and I just participated in a retreat experience that was amazing. And I see that as part of what I want to be doing. I want to connect face to face with groups of people. And we talked earlier about people like Mike Dooley, and there's other people, other mentors I've had, Sonia Choquette, and a number, Wayne Dyer. These people talk to large audiences of people. That's what I want to do. I also want it not only to be like that, but to, I don't mean like that in a bad way, but I want it to have that intimate feel where, people really get something personally out of those experiences. Cause that's where the magic is, those connections. That connecting with people is really what I'm about and what's so huge and magical for me. So I want to do that both on those kind of a grand public speaking kind of scenario, but also some sort of intimate connection, a group of 50 or whatever it might be.
There's something to be said for that, that you can't get through, social media or,
oddly enough, you can. You really can. Anything that you can do. I mean, it's funny because energy has no bounds.
Right,
so those connections.
No, that makes sense.
I feel those there, but it's just, I want to travel. I want to see parts of the world, and having speaking engagements around the world gives me an excuse to do that. And so there's, again,
like the way you think.
Talking. Well, I want to plan it so that works out. I want to just end up showing up in a hotel and then leaving the next day. It's got to be that selfish. I want to do this for me part of it, and that's the piece. I want to see more of the world. And
it's a great way to tie things together. It's here's what I want for myself, and here's what I want to share with other people. And when you can marry those two things together, I think you've found the sweet spot. So
yeah, totally.
I don't see any reason that you can't, manifest that in your life, and I'm sure you will.
I wanted to do the same thing with music, and I think the same probably goes for you. But yeah, you use music as a means to travel, because I would also love to travel a lot.
Yeah,
I think that's a common denominator for a lot of people is, getting out there on the road and having some adventure and seeing, what the world has to offer. Because there is so much diversity, and we get so stuck in one location, and, and it's...
The world is such a beautiful place. I mean, I just marvel. I come out here and I'm amazed at cactus growing on the side of the road and palm trees.
Not covered in ice.
And not covered in ice. We don't have cactus. It doesn't grow in Minnesota. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just different. And we don't have mountains and we don't have ocean. And there's something about those things that just touch me that, I would be missing a big thing if I never had that in my life. So
I can totally relate to that feeling. 60 seconds or less. What's the meaning of life? And if you go over 60 seconds, I probably won't penalize you.
You'll forgive me.
Yeah.
That's interesting because what I believe life is about now is a lot different than what I thought it was before. But what I've come to believe life is about is to know ourselves as creators, as you alluded to, God, if you will. We create. And that's what we're here to experience, is our ability to do it deliberately, to do it joyfully, and all of the good stuff that goes along with that. So I think it's to know ourselves in that spiritual sense in this human form.
Well, couldn't have said it better myself.
That's what some Taoist monks told me a long time ago. They said it much the same way you just said it. So between what you just said and what they told me, I think you guys are right.
Well, Sue, this has been really fascinating. You're a huge inspiration to me, and I'm sure the audience is inspired. I highly recommend, any of them, if they want to explore their Akashic records, they can find you. The best place to find you is via your Facebook page or via your website.
Correct.
Soul Speaking is the name of the Facebook page.
Yes, the Facebook page is Soul Speaking, and all of my contact information is on there. The easiest way to reach me is through my email, which is just sue@soulspeaking.net, and that is also the website then.
Perfect.
And I want to just throw in one little plug here. One of the things that I do have in the works towards that goal of reaching audiences is with a couple other people. We're collaborating to create an event in Dallas, hopefully this spring. So it would be sometime in March. I'm not sure when this will air, but if you're anywhere in that area or anywhere actually, stay tuned for more information as that gets tightened down and figure out where and when specifically. And
yeah, great. I definitely, as those, details develop, please keep me in the loop, and
we'll do. Absolutely.
Do whatever we can to try and make people aware.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on today. You've been a huge joy to spend time with and talk with. And like I said, you're a huge inspiration. So
thank you very much.
Keep up that good work.
Appreciate the opportunity to share this with you and your audience. So thank you.
All right, folks. Thanks for listening. Until next time, remember, as long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Take care, everyone.